Christy here for Sunny Studio Stamps. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Classy Christmas stamp set. I've stamped the images I'll be coloring in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink and some pine boughs in Sage Leaf, but I'm going to set those aside for now. I'm going to concentrate first on my Copic coloring, beginning with the poinsettias. For those I'm using R22, R24, R29, and R39. So the first thing I'm going to do is begin to separate out each of these petals with a little bit of that R39, my darkest color. I'm adding that right down at the base of each petal, and then also bringing it partway up the center line to give it a creased look. That way it'll make the edges of the petal seem like they're turned up a bit because they're going to catch the most light by adding the highlight in those places. So all of the petals that are on the top are getting that darkest color right down at their base. It's going to make them look really tight together. And then any of the bottom ones, I'm going to add that color where the other petals are overlapping, where they would also be cast in shadow. So I'm just working my way around that flower, making sure that I don't miss any of the petals and making sure that I have enough depth on there that it's going to really lift that flower off the page and make it look like it's coming to life. Then I'm going to bring in the R29 and begin to blend that out. I definitely want to save room for all four shades, so I have a lot of contrast. So I'm going to try to leave enough room for the other two colors. It's a little bit tricky on the really small leaves, but I'm going to try to squeeze at least a little bit of all of those colors onto each of these little petals. So I'm going to again just work my way around the flower, making sure that I don't miss any. I really love the way that these are drawn. I don't color flowers very often. It's makes me a little bit nervous, to be honest, but poinsettias are my husband's favorite flower, so I really wanted to do a good job on this one and do him proud. So I've moved on to the R24 now, and I'm bringing that color out even further. And honestly, if you wanted to, you could just use these darkest three shades. I think this combination would look so good, but I just wanted to have that extra bit of highlight on there to really make my poinsettia pop. So that's why I decided to also add in the R24. So I'm going to take that next and I'm going to just fill in any remaining white space. So there was one little petal in there that I did just color with the darkest three shades, but all the rest I'm going to have a little bit of that R22 on there. And you can see how that just really makes those petals start to curve a little bit. And I just think it's a nice touch. So if you don't mind using the four colors, I do think it just makes it that much more dynamic, but like I said, if you only have three markers, that will work as well. So I'm going to do the other two poinsettias off screen because it's fairly repetitive, and then I'm going to move on to the centers. And for those, I'm using YR21, YR23, and YR27. I use the YR27 down at the bottom, and then I brought the YR23 around to the top, and then the center ones I used the YR21 for those to make those also kind of just push up and make it look a little bit more rounded. And I did do a second layer of the darkest two colors. For my first set of leaves, I'm going to use YG93, YG95, YG97, and YG99. And very similar to the way I did the poinsettia petals, I'm going to put my darkest down at the base and up the center line, and then start to color out from darkest to lightest. So I'll blend out with the YG97 and then the YG95 and finish with the YG93 as my highlight. And I'm just going to do the 3 leaves that have the deeper scallops with this combination. I wanted to have a kind of a 2-tone look for those leaves, so I decided to pull out a different combo for the 2 remaining leaves. And I did do a second layer on this leaf just to make sure that my blend was nice and smooth. So my second set of greens is G40, G43, G94, and G99. And these are very similar in tone to the greens that I've already used, but the previous greens were like a warm toned green. They have like a little bit of a brown undertone to them. And these are cool tone. They have more of like a blue undertone to them. So it's just going to give me like some warm and cools on the card, and I thought the mix of that could be really interesting. So I started with the G99 and blended out with the G94, then the G43 and the G40 for my highlight. And again, I did a second layer just to increase that saturation and smooth out that blend. And then I'll do the other leaf off screen just like I have with the additional images to save you some time in the video. So I'm moving on to the pine cones, and I'm using E55, E57, and E59 for those. Again, I'm taking my darkest shade, that E59, and adding a little bit of a shadow down at the base of each of those little sections of the pine cone. It's real quick and easy to do, and I think it adds a lot of dimension in the final image once it's all colored. So I started with that E59, and now I'm going to take the E57 and begin to blend that out. On the really small ones up at the very top, it's really just adding a tiny little dot to leave room for that highlight shade. But on the other ones, I'm kind of just scribbling right over the edge of the E59 to get those 2 shades to blend nicely together, and to keep things looking like they have a little bit of texture. I don't want too smooth of a blend on this one because it is a rougher textured item. So I'm going to fill in all of the white space with that E55, just coloring over that real quick and easy. And like I said, I think that has a lot of depth on it with these 3 shades. So all that's left is the little berries, and I wanted them to look like juniper berries. So I'm using B91, B93, B95, and B97. So I'm starting with that B97, and again, like I did with the pine cone, I wanted them to have that kind of dusty texture that those berries get. Blueberries also have that kind of like powdery substance on them, so I didn't want them to be too smooth. So I'm using a little dotting motion to lay that color down. And then I'm blending out with the B95, and then I'm going to bring in the B93 in the same way, just kind of stippling my marker to get that kind of rougher look. Not like a bumpy texture exactly, but I don't know, it just makes it look a little bit more, it's just not quite completely smooth and glossy. And so I used the B91, but I decided I wanted something in there that added just a little bit more of a brighter touch. I tried the B95, that was totally wrong. It was way too dark. So then I grabbed the B00, and that was perfect. So I'm gonna just fill in the rest of those berries with a little bit of that B00, and it just adds a tiny bit of like a brightness to it that I think helped give it that little bit of a dustier texture. So I was really happy with how those turned out. And then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm going to take the Frilly Frames lattice die, and I'm going to tape that into place over some Lawn Fawn Storm Cloud cardstock. And then I'm going to line up the center piece, and I'm going to tape that also into place. I'm less concerned about the die being taped to the cardstock, more that the die is taped to itself, the outer and inner parts, just so it doesn't slide around, and then I can line it up on my cardstock when I run it through my die cutting machine. So I have done that now, and you can see all of those little pieces. So they're really easy to pop out by hand, or you can also use a little tool by Spellbinders, which is what I ended up grabbing, and it just kind of makes it super easy. It just really punches out all of those little pieces very quickly. I wanted to turn this into a shaker card, so I have flipped over that panel to the back side, and I'm lining all 4 edges with some 1/8 of an inch score tape. And the 1/8 of an inch score tape is actually the perfect width for this die. So I'm going to peel off those release papers, and I have cut down a piece of acetate to size. So I will line that up over top of that tape and make sure that it is perfectly aligned, and then press that down into place. To fill my shaker, I am piling all of my shaker material right onto my card base, and I'm using a mixture of red, green, and gold 6mm sequins. I'm also going to add some gold 4mm sequins and some silver star sequins. I wanted to have a good representation of the various colors that I used on the card front in the shaker material. I thought that these colors would really pop against that dark gray card base. I also wanted to strike a balance between having enough going on in there that it's fun to shake, but not so much that like it gets caught up, because I'm only going to use 1 layer of foam tape. If you like a shaker card that the shaker material is able to move around a little more freely, you might like to use 2 layers of foam tape, but I prefer a lower profile card. The double layer just makes it so bulky, but if you prefer that style, go ahead and do that. So I'm going to line up my frame right over top and then press that down into place and make sure that that material is able to move, which it is. So now I can move on to decorating. To adhere my images today, I decided to try something different. Normally I would use liquid glue, but because I'm adhering things to acetate, sometimes it doesn't quite set on there, or it takes a long time to. So I decided to try using glue dots, and I have 2 different sizes. I have the regular size and then the minis, and really the only reason that I have the 2 sizes is because I was on the very end of the roll of the regular, so I decided to kind of mix and match there. But I think just 1 size would do. And I'm telling you, these really held down. I wanted to move one of my poinsettias a little bit lower, and I had a really hard time pulling it up, even though I had just stuck it down. And the glue dot actually stayed there, and it kind of tore the back of the paper, but it was totally fine because it, you can't tell from the front, and the poinsettia was going to cover that space up anyway. So if you're trying to glue things to the front of acetate and it's just not working, try glue dots. It was totally a game changer for me. So the only real plan I had here for how to adhere my images was that I wanted them to come down the left-hand side of the card and kind of extend a little bit down towards the bottom right. So I'm just kind of mixing and matching my various pieces. I like to start with my largest images first and then work around down to my smaller images and just kind of figure out my placement here and there, try things out before I stick them down, see how they look. And another big thing that I like to do is make sure that I don't have 2 similar colors right next to each other. So because I stuck that cool toned leaf right there, I made sure that the next closest leaf was going to be one of the warmer toned ones. And I also made sure like that my pine cones were broken up by the poinsettias. They weren't right next to each other. And I'm going to do the same thing with the berries later on. I've got several of these pine boughs that I stamped in the sage leaf ink from Lawn Fawn. So I'm just testing everything out here, and then once I like where it's headed, I'll start to adhere things with those glue dots. I'm also trying to work in layers, so after I have my larger images down and the ones that I knew that I wanted to save for the edge, I'm starting to layer the pine boughs next because I know that other things can go on top of those. So I'm saving those berries because I know that I want those to be kind of like towards the top of these layers here. And then just kind of working everything in. Also on that left hand side, I did make sure that anything that extended beyond the frame, which I like to do because it just adds so much movement to the card, going all the way to the edge, but I made sure that it didn't hang off the edge of the card. It kind of just lines up with the edge of the card and no further, because anything that hangs off completely is going to get bent in the mail, and that doesn't look good. You put all this work into making this beautiful card, and then you don't want it to get ruined by, having things kind of be bent. You could even like reinforce some of those with some foam tape just along the edge to give it some added support. I'm also trying to fill in any of the little gaps between that cluster where you can see the sequins. I did add one more pine bough to the bottom left corner. My camera battery died right here, so I didn't catch it on camera, but you'll see it in a few minutes here. But right now I'm going to move on to my sentiment. So I'm taking another piece of that storm cloud cardstock because I wanted to keep everything really consistent and have just the colors and the coloring pop. So I am stamping out the word Noel from Classy Christmas in some Versamark ink, and then I'm going to coat that with some liquid platinum embossing powder from Ranger. I figured that would be kind of in the middle of the gold and silver that I used in the sequins, so hopefully it would just tie everything together. So I'll heat set that until it is nice and shiny. And then I'm going to grab a microfiber cloth and just buff any of that white powder away so I get a nice clean piece of cardstock again. I'm also going to create an insert for the inside of my card since it's such a dark color cardstock. So I'm taking some lobster ink from Lawn Fawn and stamping another poinsettia, and then the sentiment, enjoy the beauty of the season, which is from Inside Greetings Christmas. So now I'm ready to assemble these final little pieces. So I will add some glue to the insert and pop that inside my card, just making sure that it's lined up so that cardstock creates a nice frame around it. And I die cut the sentiment using the banner die from Fancy Frames Rectangle. I'm actually going to trim that down just slightly so that I can tuck it in to my little cluster of pine boughs and poinsettias. And then I'll add some more glue dots to the back of that. And I'm going to nestle that in so that it's tucked behind the pine cone and that warmer toned leaf to just integrate it a little bit more into that little cluster, and then press that down into place. And then as a final embellishment, I added some Stardust stickles. I just thought this would add the perfect frosty touch to this little cluster here and just really elevate this kind of more elegant style card. So I added it in a very thin little streaks to the pine boughs, and I added it to the berries. I put it pretty much all over. I just was loving the way it was looking against those colored images. So I put it on the pine cones and on the insides of the poinsettias. And then I'm also going to add it down the centers of each of the other leaves as well. So between the stickles and the sequins, this one just has so much sparkle going on. I'm going to lift that up to the camera so you can see how it catches the light. I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I don't do this style of card very often, but I was very pleased with how it turned out. So there was another look at the inside, and here's a look at all of that shaker material in action. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe to Sunny Studios YouTube channel. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you'll find those listed and linked below the video. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.